Hey, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to the first episode of 2024. Just give me a focus, whatever that looks like. And so, when we're thinking about a focus, it makes me think of, how if you're a mom or a parent of toddlers, they go through that phase where they're consistently asking the word why. And so I distinctly remember this with my 6-year-old. He was um, going through his, I want to know everything phase. And so we'd be in the car and we're driving on these really long trips, and he would just start asking why. Why are we stopping? Because the light's red. Why? Because we need a traffic light to make sure that everybody's following the rules of the road. Why? So that we don't get into accidents. And as a parent, you're like, oh my gosh, if you ask me why one more time, I'm going to lose my entire mind. But I would say that the focus on that word why gives them insight and so many answers to all of their questions. And so it's in the asking of why that they get exactly what their goal is. And that really is more knowledge and to know more about what's going on in the world. And even though it tends to be super annoying to the people who are answering the questions, the reality is that them focusing on that one word over and over and over again gets them the results that they're looking for. They want to know more. They're inquisitive. They want to know the answers to all the things. And that one word is getting them those answers. And so that actually is what we're going to be talking about today is choosing your word for the year, how that focus on that one word can actually ignite your goals for the year, but also keep you laser focused on what it is that your vision is for that year. Now, when we're thinking about choosing our goal, this is not a complete overhaul, right? So you know how when you go into towns that are trying to build their economy and they're adding things one step at a time, right? That is because the process requires them to add new things as they go along because the process is to continue to keep the economy the way that it is, but then also to increase it over time. So they don't just go in there and knock everything down and start over because that would, one, create a loss for the economy that they may not be able to obtain and to get that back, right? But it also prevents the people who are already going into that space from going there anymore because there's nothing there for them to see. And so when you're thinking about making this goal and really landing on your word, you have to think about it as a gradual process. So this is not a complete overhaul of your life. And the reason that we do it that way is because if you do a complete overhaul, you're going to either one, not stay committed to the process, two, think that it's too difficult, or you're going to give up really soon because the pressure is too big when you're trying to do a complete overhaul. So you're not going to look in the mirror and be like, what are all the things that are wrong with me? Okay, I'm going to fix all those things because that's not realistic. Um, I remember there was a point in time where going through body image issues, etc. And like I had this vision. I even had a picture saved as the background on my phone of this is the body that I want to have. And I remember looking in the mirror and being like, okay, here are the things that need to change. And then looking up all the information online. I know y'all have done this, so don't try to act like I'm the only one, but looking up all the information online that would get me to that. And so it was a new diet plan, it was a new workout plan, it was a new daily activity plan, it was drinking more water. And so like I tried to do all of it at one time and failed miserably because there's no way that you can completely overhaul your life like that and remain consistent to it. It's too many changes at one time. And to build a habit, it's a gradual process to that habit. And so when you're landing on your word and you're picking your word, remember that you're not trying to do this complete overhaul. You're really thinking about something that's going to land with you, something that can be a process, and something that you're going to remain committed to because the outcome is more important to you than how arduous the process is. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit about the words that I've chosen, how I stay committed to the process, and what I do with the word. Because, the teacher in me is like, well, if we're not going to do anything with it, then it's not important. It's going to lack importance to us, and we're not going to have ownership of it, and we're not going to stay true to it. So how do we do that? What's the process look like for us to do that? Well, the first thing is, just like that toddler, you're going to stick with that one word that's going to get to the outcome that you want to get to. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to do that. And because you're sticking to that one word, it's going to be top of mind every single day. We're going to create affirmations that lead you back to it, so that it's not just, I picked a word and that was my word, and then I'm going to look at it again later. It's a continuous looking at the word, unraveling of the word, seeing how it's unraveling in your life, and then the process to get you to that space. So I'm going to share a little bit with you about how I do it. So I have this notebook, and this notebook is my faith journal. And so it is where I put my ideas for the word that I've landed on, some things that attach to that, and some things that I'm believing for the next year. But before I ever even look at this year's word, I look back on the year prior, and I think about what happened, what ways did God move, what ways did I change that made that word come to light in my life and made the goal happen. And so my first year of doing this, I chose the word healing because I was in a very uprooted space. That's a really good word for it. I just wasn't grounded in anything, and I really wanted to heal from the things that I had experienced. And then once I went through that healing journey, then the next year I chose the word healthy because though I had gone through a healing process, there were some unhealthy patterns that I was still holding on to, and I wanted to get rid of those. So I chose the word healthy for that one. And so um, I went through that journey. And then last year, the word that I landed on was belonging. And if you followed me at all throughout the past year, you know that I've talked about belonging more than I've talked about pretty much anything else, because that word really was the word that I was honing in on and focusing on, and how it was unraveling in my life was something that I shared on a consistent basis, because I wanted you guys to, one, see the impact of choosing a word for the year, but two, see the lessons that I learned in what belonging actually means. And so when I look back at what I wrote for last year, there's this, it's like a 4-page thing, but it talks about, what I believed for the year before, what word I held on to for the year before. And then I go through, like, what are some things that I noticed about what happened with that word in the year. And then I get to the part where I talk about what the word for the next year is going to be. And so that past year, so when I got to 12/31 of 2022, I picked the word for 2023. And so I actually picked the word becoming, which is really interesting, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I wrote down this year's word is becoming, and the reason that I'm picking this word is because I'm tired of accepting the narrative that I'm too much or not enough. It's not an accept me as I am approach, because we all know I'm a forever growing type of girl, but it's reading less of what will fix me and more of what celebrates what I already am. It's moving from overhauling to alteration, which I just shared with you guys. It's knowing when people, places, and situations require me to change to be accepted, and realizing when I'm not loved for just existing. It's knowing that love is conditionless when it's with people who really mean it, and it's giving myself the space to trade in fitting in for finding spaces that fit me. Being authentically Carrie Nicole, because I kind of like her. And then the next thing that I do in that space is talk about the things that I'm believing for the upcoming year. So I wrote, the things that I'm believing for this year is I will be at peace. I will be the kind of mom that I'm proud of. I will be in less debt because y'all know student loans, they be loaning. And I will be celebrated by someone who genuinely loves me. I will be in spaces that I have carved for myself. I will be consistent with both writing and speaking and also podcasting and really everything else. And I will be in the best shape of my life. And so I wrote that, like I told you, in 12/31 of 2022. And so now at the end of 2023, I haven't written anything else in the journal, right? I've just been taking a mental note and account of the things that have been happening in my space. Now, obviously, I can go back to my social media platforms and see those moments in real time that I documented, but I try not to do that because I want to see if a year later I can recount the things that have happened in that year that have affected me as it relates to that word. And because I'm focusing on that word, the thing that happens is you start to filter everything through the lens of that word because you're so deeply rooted in making that word top of mind because the goal is so important to you. And so when I looked back at that journal entry from last year, and then I read it this year, it was interesting because I hadn't even realized that I had first chosen the word becoming. I had thought that I chose the word belonging all along. And it's funny how that unfolded. And I'm going to read to you what I wrote about it because it was like a epiphany to me that I had written that, but then it became belonging. But then when I shifted back into the year, at the beginning of the year, and focusing on that word becoming, um, actually became the first 3 months of my belonging journey. And so I wrote, this year's journey was about belonging. But when I looked back at my entry from last year, I noticed that I wrote the word becoming. No irony falls on me with this observation. While knowing the word I was given was belonging, subconsciously I knew it would be a lot of becoming first. And that's exactly what happened. I spent the entire first quarter with me figuring out who I was and who I wanted to be. I started the year quite literally fighting for a relationship that I knew wasn't for me, and that's because I was still willing to be less of me in an effort to make someone else more comfortable being with me. God got a hold of me and reminded me that He didn't create me to shrink for anyone, but that He needed me to unapologetically be who He called me to be so that He could move me into the spaces He meant for me. So I met with my therapist and I decided I would no longer be anything but what I felt deep inside of my being. I trusted my intuition and internal knowing, and almost immediately, the people in my life who were never meant to be there and who were benefiting from my pretending started to notice that they didn't like this version of me and they fell off. That relationship ended. People who were formerly using me as their scapegoat or benefiting from me abandoning myself just fell off. And when I became more of me, I also found myself more alone. But this year, I actually welcomed the solitude. And eventually, that solitude was filled with the space to be and giving myself permission to continuously be her and never conform again. And once that happened, I felt comfortable within, even when I was uncomfortable in spaces. That was true belonging, being able to be me and never abandon her no matter what. Then God started filling those spaces with the right people, friends who I immediately knew were my people, who now feel more like family than friends, people who don't require anything other than me being myself and actually celebrate just my presence. But He couldn't do it until I let go of the former things so that He could do a new thing. I remember exactly when it happened. And I think I've told you guys this story, but I'll share again because I think it's impactful for you to know the process. So, chose the word becoming, actually choosing the word belonging and focusing that as my focal point. It wasn't until May that like the epiphany happened. And that's because it took me so many months to actually figure out the becoming part of it so that belonging could happen. So then I was like in May, not ironically or coincidentally, because I don't believe in coincidences, my birthday month during 31 days of prayer calls with the Girl I See You movement, God gave me new insight every day into what I needed to be giving up and who I needed to let go of in order to walk into the new thing He had for me. The entire month, I released it from my mind, then my body, and delved into what my soul needed. I let go of that relationship and latched onto my people. And then I document who those people are and how those people have connected me to other people, and how that month just let me know that because it's my birthday month, it was like a new awakening to, you've become her. Now, never abandon her to go back into the spaces that you were in before. So when you go to your journal this year, if you didn't choose a word for last year, that's okay, because you can still do this. So let's start with those people who did choose a word for last year. If you chose a word for last year, you're going to go into your journal and you're going to document every single moment that you can recount at the end at the end of this year, where God showed you and revealed to you how that word was coming to fruition, the blessings that he bestowed upon you, those things that you just can't get out of your brain that he did for you as it relates to that word. You're going to document how it felt, what you went through, the specifics of that situation. And that's going to help you when you go back to look at it the following year. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, look at all of these things God did for me. In fact, before I wrote this, I read the one from last year so that it could just get my brain ready for recounting all of the places that he showed up and showed out in my life. And so if you chose a word, that's what you're going to do. You're going to detail all the spaces where that word became apparent and the blessings also were, sorry, sick again, were quite obvious to you in your year. If you didn't choose a word for last year, then instead of doing it through the lens of the word, you're just going to write down the blessings and the things that happened in your life. And if they were hard things, write them down. If you didn't really have a journey of growth during that time, write it down too. Write down all of those things that were top of mind and were the experiences that are so memorable from this year, good, bad, or indifferent. And then once you've written that down, once you've detailed all of the things that God did for you, then I like to write a list of the things that I'm believing for. So like I look back at that list, and it's usually 7 things, ironically. And so and 7 is new, the number that means newness and rebirth and these type of things. And so I look back at those and then I write, I was believing for this and this is what happened. So I write specific details. I was believing for this and then this happened. And so if you didn't have a word of the year, if you didn't have 7 things that you believed in, you can just write it down. Like last year, I believed for this at the beginning of the year, and here's what happened as a result of it. And that'll give you specifics on how God showed up or how you feel like maybe you need to still work on this thing. And then once I detail all of those things, I start to talk about what my word is for this year. And so this year, my word is abundance. And I'm going to walk you through how I chose that word. And then I'll read to you the part of this faith journal where I wrote down what I'm believing for in the upcoming year. So how do you choose your word? Well, oftentimes I just sit and meditate and pray to God to give it to me, right? And it'll just come in like the strangest moment. I'll be like riding in my car or listening to a podcast and this word comes and I'm like, oh, that's it. Ironically, last year, my word came in October. Like I heard it and I was like, oh, I know what I'm focusing on the next year. This year, my word came at the beginning of December, and it was just a word that I saw. It popped into my head, and I was like, oh, that's it. And the reason that I know that that word is the word is because it relates specifically to something that's a negative emotion or feeling that I'm dealing with right now. So if you're choosing a word for the year and it hasn't landed on you and you're trying to land on it, think about the negative thing. So your word is going to be the opposite of that thing. So what's one thing that you struggle with and it bleeds into all parts of your life? And so obviously mine was a feeling of lack and focusing on the lack before I could get to the abundance, right? And so thinking like, I believe that God does great things, but does he do great things for me? I believe that God is a healer and that he is a miracle worker, but does he do those things for me? Do I feel like he loves me enough to do those things for me? Like that's how I filter everything. That's the lens that I feel. So because I know that about myself, I know that the opposite of that is abundance. So it's not having those limiting beliefs, it's believing for the abundance that he has for me and the abundance that life can offer me if I unleash myself and get out from under the weight of those limiting beliefs. And so that's the first thing when you're landing on your word. You got to pick something that's the opposite of where your negative thoughts tend to find a home, right? And that's like what you ruminate on. And the reason that you pick that is because that's going to mean something to you, and it's going to create a sense of ownership, because that word is going to be the opposite of something that has been ruminating negatively in your life, and you're going to want that to go away just by natural law. Like, you don't want to feel that negative feeling. So that's the first thing. Sorry, this is a lot of clearing of the throat this time, but we're doing it. The second thing is you have to write it down and make it plain, right? So you can't just say, okay, I'm going to focus on the word abundance. Like, you have to know what that means. What does it mean to you? What are you hoping to see as it relates to abundance? What are you hoping happens in your life? Where do you want to see God performing the miracles in your life as it relates to that word? And so when you write it down and make it plain, what you're really doing is writing that part that I was telling you before, where you say things I'm believing for, things I'm believing that are going to happen in the year, and you list them. And you list them specifically. Just so happens mine are 7. If your list is 21, then make it 21. But you need to make it plain that that is what you're wishing for, and you need to make it specific, because when those things happen, you're going to know that that miracle was performed as it relates specifically to that word, and it was specifically what you asked for because you wrote it down. And then the last one is that you have to believe it's an unraveling, right? It's slow release of the process, and you have to remain accountable to that, right? So when I went into last year, or this current year, 2023, and I knew that my word was belonging, I immediately thought, okay, I'm just going to feel like I belong and fit into spaces. But it took me months to figure out that the first part of belonging was learning how to just be, how to be who I am, how to stop fixing myself to fit into spaces, because it doesn't work. People know you're not authentic, and you never feel like you truly fit in because you're changing yourself for the people who are in the room. So it took me months to figure out the being part, the becoming part of belonging. And then once I figured that out, then I had to hold myself accountable to how I was going to change my habits in those spaces and no longer be that person. So it was an unraveling of the process. And so you have to think about it that way. You're not just going to wake up on January 1st of 2024 and be your word. Otherwise, what's the point of having a goal, right? It's a process that is naturally progressing toward that. And so your hope is that by the end of the year, you're going to feel like you're more of that word, as opposed to every day, I'm going to feel like I am that word. Maybe a closer version to that word, but a complete overhaul does not last. So you have to make those daily alterations. And then how do you stay accountable to it? You take this journal back out, because like I told you, I don't usually look back at it. But the first year I did this, I had to look back and say, what am I believing for? Is what I'm doing right now in alignment with what I'm believing for? And if it's not, then I need to change this habit. And so you take this journal back out. You also can keep a diary for yourself where, daily you're saying, okay, this is what happened today. This is how it doesn't match up with the word that I chose. And here's something that I'm going to start with as part of my habits reforming, so that you can get those thoughts out and process it. Not necessarily so you're keeping a record of the things that are happening. So you have to keep yourself accountable. Now, this is the part where those affirmations come in. On my mirror, in my bathroom, I wrote down several affirmations, and they say things like, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, they say things like, your mistakes don't define you. You can become anybody that you want to be. People's opinions do not determine your worth. They say things like this: And so I put them on my mirror in my bathroom so that I look at them every single day. So every day they're right there and they're affirmations that lead directly back to my word. And they are things that I was noticing about me that were impeding on my ability to become that word. So this is the part where you're going to write down the affirmations, because the affirmations keep it top of mind. So when you walk into your bathroom, and if you're like me and you take forever into Tuesdays to get ready in the morning, you see that when you wake up, you see it when you're brushing your teeth. You see, it's just like your toddler saying the word why. He hears it a million times because he wants to know a million times, and you hear it a million times too. But that word is getting him what he wants. So he's going to keep on asking why, but why, but why? Because it gets him the information that he needs. These affirmations on your mirror in the morning are getting you in the mental space that you need to be in order to get to your goal. So you put whether you believe the affirmation on the day you write it or not, you put it there. And so I haven't written my affirmations for this year yet, but I will be writing them because I just finished the journal entry yesterday. And I'm going to write down things that get rid of my limiting beliefs and focus more on the abundance part of it. And I've already unearthed something that I'm noticing is a part of this process, which I'll talk to you guys about next week. But it was something that I usually choose a quote that goes with my word and then talk about that in my first blog, which I'll be doing. And as soon as I chose the quote, I was like, oh, I know what my first couple of months are going to look like. And so I'll talk to you guys about that in the blog because I think that it's super important to see what the word actually is saying to you and not just how you're going to get to the word. Because there's layers to this. There's going to be things that you unearth that you're like, oh, didn't know that I needed to focus and work on that to get to this space. And so anyways, those affirmations are going to be the slow release of the process, and they're going to be what keeps you accountable because you're going to keep going back to those. This is truly a solitude process. You might have an accountability partner who you talk to about the thing, but it really is in you. Nobody can keep you accountable to this word but you. And I've had people who share their words with me, and that's beautiful. And sometimes I'll remind them, remember your word is restoration, and remember your word is accountability. Remember your word is abundance. Remember your word, and I'll remind them so that their brain shifts back to the word, but I never actually get into the weeds with them because this is a solitude thing. You're changing yourself. You have to be accountable to yourself, and you have to truly be invested and take ownership yourself. So without further ado, here's the section that's about my word for this year. This year's word is abundance because I know my limiting beliefs and ruminating in lack have kept me here. I'm holding on to what's for me is for me while accepting the calling on my life for the capacity that God has shown me it will be. No longer am I willing to sit in a space that shows parts of me while staying small and accepting the breadcrumbs of my calling. I'm going to be all of me and trust my intuition in His direction to live a life of abundance. But first, I have to unload the thoughts of lack. So there's a sneak peek into that blog. I'm believing for financial freedom. I'm believing for more speaking engagements on bigger stages. I'm believing for a YouTube channel with millions of followers. I'm believing for God seeing me the way that God sees me. I'm believing for the ability to rest without feeling like I have to be overproductive. I'm believing for a fruitful relationship resulting in marriage. And I'm believing for investments that flourish. Those investments look like time, physical investments, financial investments, and spiritual investments. So next year, at this exact time, I'm going to be recounting all of the places that abundance showed up in my life. And I'm going to be talking specifically in this journal about how those speaking engagements showed up, how those followers on the YouTube channel showed up, how I was connected to people who helped me do that, how I was able to see myself through God's eyes, right? Like there's going to be so many different experiences where I know that that's going to happen because I've seen the miracle of choosing this focus word every single year since the first year that I did it. It's not a resolution, it's a word of the year because it's a focal point for you to continue to believe and keep top of mind that the goal that you've set for yourself is going to come to fruition. If you need any help landing on your word, if you need any help figuring out how to write in your journal for the word. If you need anything from me, because I would love to help you through this process, certainly reach out to me on all social media platforms. Send me a DM. Let me know how I might help or assist you. Also, remember this podcast comes out every Monday. You can catch it on the YouTube channel, or you can catch it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. Also, remember to log into carrienicole.com, where you can get your weekly dose of the newsletter. Go ahead and type your email in there and subscribe to it so you get the email whenever the newsletter comes out. And thank you so much for tuning in. Tune into the rest of the videos this week so that you can get more insight on choosing your word of the year and how it's going to show up and God's going to show out while unraveling your word throughout this year. Thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate you all.